My name is Lisa Beth Lentini Walker, and we are here today for our final Mentor Core event for 2020. This is the last one for 2020, which means we are done with our programming until next year. I have really enjoyed the last 6 months where we have done these programs, and it is exciting to have our headliner as our closing act, Lori Terwinski. Mentor Core is a community for compliance, security, and risk professionals. And we want it to be a safe and healthy community where we can all learn and grow from each other. So we're thrilled to have you here today. And I want to take just a moment to introduce my partner in not crime, because we've clarified that quite a bit. My co-founder, Dan, can you say hi?
Hi, how are you? Hope everybody's doing well and that the end of the year is going well. And Lori, thanks for being here. We're really excited to have you and chat today.
Thanks very much. It's really an honor to be here to speak with all of you.
And I called you our headliner for a reason. Part of your background. So I love your background. Let's just start with you may be the coolest person I know. Um, but part of what makes you so unique is you have so many different aspects of yourself and you bring them all to bear in your work. The reason I talked about you as our headliner because you have been a stand-up comic and you're kind of finishing out our show for the year. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I currently work at the AARP Public Policy Institute, where I am the Director of Finance and Employment. And as part of my job, I have studied things like unemployment, but I've also studied diversity and inclusion, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But before I started all of that, I quit my job for a time to study stand-up comedy. So we'll talk more about that as we move into the conversation. But to some people, I may look like someone who can't hold a job or can't decide where I'm going. But part of our conversation today is going to be to show you how there are so many different aspects we bring to the workplace and in our home life, and all of these skills can come together and help us in all aspects of our life. And so that's what I want to hopefully show you today.
Terrific. Well, let's get started. This sounds like it's going to be very informative for everyone. So tell us more.
Okay, so if it's okay, I would like to start with I would like to share my screen. We'll see if I can manage to do this. And okay, so all right, there we go. All right, so I want to give a shout out to Lisa Beth for her fine ad. We are also going to talk a little bit about the choice of the Grand Canyon as the background. But I would like to begin today's conversation with a discussion of who. And the reason why I want to start with that is if you think about it, whenever we're thinking about where we are in life or where we might want to go, we often start with, who am I? What is it about, who am I? How do I define myself? How do I define, where, just start with the who am I? And I think sometimes we limit ourselves when we think about who we are. We should be thinking more holistically. And so, the question is, all right, so how do we think about this diversity of ourselves? Because there are so many dimensions of ourselves. So for you all who are watching, just pause for a second and think about, if someone said to you, who are you? What are the main things that you would talk about that would define yourself? And so I put together a little photo collage here, and this is to get us all thinking differently, hopefully. So on the left is a great blue heron. He's actually a friend of mine. We spent some time together this summer in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And so one thing you should know about me is I love being outside. I have a great appreciation of birds. And from that, I get a connection to nature, and it helps me feel, really good about the world. The top photo, I am an academic. I work on research. I do financial research on mortgage foreclosures and things, and that's a piece of me that, it's really, a strong part of who I am. Down below, I'm sitting on the friend's couch, and that's because I think of myself as being a good friend to many people. Um, and then over on the right is the headshot, from when I was doing stand-up comedy full time. But in addition to that list, right? If I said, who am I, right? I would be a wife. I'm a dog mother. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter. I'm a PhD economist. I'm a financial planner. I'm a certified financial planner, so I can help people with comprehensive planning over the life course. I am also a diversity and inclusion practitioner and am a certified practitioner because I most recently completed a credential from Cornell University that gives me yet another credential in the space. But the one piece of me that I get the most questions about is the stand-up comedy piece, because people will look at this and they'll say, gosh, this doesn't fit. PhDs are not stand-up comics. I would argue more should be. Um, I think the world would be a better place if we had economists who could laugh once in a while. But the other thing that you get from this kind of an exercise, as you're thinking about yourself, is like, for instance, the next time you're building a resume or thinking about where you might want to go, think about your whole self and the pieces of you that feed you. What are the things you do that rejuvenate you? What makes you have more energy? And so for me, I had a 6-week sabbatical essentially this summer where I spent my time in the Outer Banks, um, kayaking, bird watching, taking photos. And in today's environment of being in the midst of a pandemic, when we can't see people we want to see, it was an incredibly special experience at this time. So that's the first thing I would like everyone to think about. So then I want you to think about the where. And so when you think about where, it's like, where have I been? And so you can think, some about this is, geographically, where did I grow up? Where do I live now? Where have I traveled? What jobs have I held? I have down here J.C. Penney, and people often, I often ask, how many people have worked at J.C. Penney, and often I find, if there's a crowd of 200 people, at least 10 or 15 raise their hand. And so, why do I talk about it? Well, when I was 16, I got a job at J.C. Penney, and my mother's best friend got me the job. And so everyone I worked with was over the age of 50, and I was 16. And so I learned about the multi-generational workforce. I learned customer service. I learned how to treat people. And I learned from them, and they actually learned from me too. And this is the incredible opportunity that we have in today's workforce, where we have 5 generations working side by side. If you are the younger person, you have an opportunity to teach your older colleagues things. And if you're the older person, you have a lot you can teach to the younger crowd as well. And that's I think one of the purposes of Mentor Core, right, is to connect people, so that you can help one another. And this is something we should all do, no matter what job we have or where we happen to be. So continuing the chat about the where, up on the corner there on the right is the AARP building where I work now. Although right now I should have a picture of my spare room because I'm sitting in my spare room. We had a chat. I had a wall hanging behind me, but it was distracting, so I removed it. So now everybody thinks I'm like sitting in a closet somewhere. And I just want you to know I'm well, I'm fine, I'm not locked in, and everything's good.
Blink if you
So
need rescuing.
Right. Blink a
yeah.
couple times.
I will let you. And I do have furnishings, and I do have wall, and I have a plant somewhere. So I just
Is it alive? Is the
uh,
plant still alive?
well, that's why it's not on. But so and then down the bottom is actually a photo of my university. So we learn a lot. There are things that we bring with us no matter what experiences, and also in terms of jobs. So I spent time working in London as an intern when I was in grad school. And the kinds of things you learn in those kind of environments is, you are the outsider, you are the person who's different, you are in the midst of someone else's culture, and it's not that easy to fit in. And so if you think about our workplaces today, we are often working with people from a variety of backgrounds. And so, again, when you think of the where you've come from, what are your experiences, think about the people around you and how you can help them to feel more welcome and included in the workplace. So I like to think, and in terms of the where, in terms of people who may be job hunting right now, it's like, where would you like to be? We know where you've been, we know where you are. And so a question we should always be asking ourselves is, what's next for us? Where would we like to go? And even though we are in the midst of a rough job market, things will get better. And so we will have opportunity. Many of us have opportunity right now, but maybe we can't see it. And so the question is, always be thinking of where might I go next, and where do I want to go. So then we're going to talk about the skills issue. And so in terms of who you are and where you've been, right? What are the things you've learned along the way? And when we talk about skills, I like to think there's two kinds of skills, right? There's some of it is like, we have innate skills, talent that we're born with. And so I will say, for me, if you had to say, gee, Lori, is there anything you're particularly talented at, right? I would tell you I am funny, because I believe that, and I make people laugh all the time. But the other thing I'll say about the innate skills and the innate talent is I also studied it. And so in 2004, after I completed my PhD in economics, I dropped out of the workforce to go to LA and study comedy with someone who had been a stand-up comedian for many years. She taught comedy courses. I took the course, and then I spent the next 4 years going to every open mic I could find, promoting myself, taking any gig I could get. And I was on stage, 5 nights a week, 6 nights a week, because it's amazing how many open mics you can find when you're looking for them. And maybe I had 3 or 5 minutes of stage time, but I never said no. And so over a course of years, I honed my skills. I like Dan, I studied improv. I went to Chicago for a summer and learned that. And so what did it get me? Well, it got me better at speaking publicly. And that is a tool that I can use every day in the job that I have now. It also taught me to listen, right? When you do improv, the biggest thing is about listening to what just happened and who just said it. And so I encourage everyone who has a particular talent to not overlook it and not think that it's irrelevant for your workplace. Um, there are always ways to use your creativity and bring it into the work that you do. In today's environment, we talk a lot about innovation. And so the most innovative ideas, when innovation is creativity. It's thinking about how to do something in a new way. So if your job is providing ethics training or compliance training, well, then think about, well, maybe we should change the delivery mechanism. Maybe we should lighten it up ever so slightly to make a point. You can use humor to make points differently. You can still be respectful, but you can make the learning experience more enjoyable. And so I have done a lot of public speaking events on the topic of age diversity. And, I wrote this report that I have here because writing is a skill that I have developed over, I've been in the workforce over 30 years. My first job involved writing. Um, it involved working with numbers. So I just want to be clear that the little photo up there is representing working with numbers, not embezzlement. So
Fine line, though.
yeah, well, right. Yeah.
It's working with numbers or working the numbers, right?
Right. Yeah. So I had the with in there. I want to be clear on that. I, so I just, I think sometimes too, when people, like, so my first job was with the U.S. government um, as an economist, and back in those days, we checked data tables by hand with a big calculator. But prior to that, I had worked as an accountant. And so when I was working as an accountant, we were doing those books by hand as well, not on a stone tablet, um, but in big ledgers. And one of my favorite stories is I was off 2 cents. One of my books didn't balance by 2 cents. We were not allowed to write off 2 cents. You had to go back and find, your 2 cent error. So what did it teach me? It taught me to be very careful working with numbers and to pay attention to that detail. So when I became an economist, you needed the numbers to add up in the table that we were doing by hand. I love to tell this story. When I first worked at Commerce in 1989, there was one computer in the hallway, and 6 of us had a floppy disk, and we would take turns, um, using the computer. Um, and so it's a little hard to, like I don't feel that old, uh, but that was the computer that we had. So, other than the gigantic mainframe computer, this is another story. We would walk down to the Treasury Department to get the data on big magnetic tapes, and they would have to. 3 of us would have to go because we couldn't carry them. And then there was a mainframe computer department where we would drop off the tapes, and then they would give us like 16,000 page printouts that we would pull the numbers out. So anyway,
all of which can be stored here now.
Right. Right.
Yeah, right. I know. And but when you think about where we've come from in terms of technology, I learned a skill in terms of looking at data, physically looking at data, being one with the data because you're carrying it, 6 city blocks in all kinds of weather. But I can look at a data table in a way that a lot of people can't. And maybe it's a skill you don't need anymore now that we have AI. But it's the kind of thing though. But every job I've had, right, I've been very meticulous about what I write and how, and what number I use and how I present it. And so, again, for no matter where you are in your career path, you should think about the job you have now and what are those special things that you're going to take with you to the next job. And I'll say, no matter what your job is, whether it is a junior entry level job or a high level job, you should be learning something from this experience, and using it to grow and figuring out which pieces of it are things you may want to explore going forward.
So there are two things that I think are particularly impressive to me. Number one, um, you talked about skills, and one of the things that we talk about a lot at MentorCore is it's great to have skills, but you need to use those muscles and exercise them, because if you've got
Mhm,
a talent,
mhm,
right? The more that you spend time becoming an expert in that space, whether it's speaking or, um, in your subject matter expertise, it takes a
mhm.
certain number of hours of practice, even with raw talent, to get really
Right.
good at something.
Mhm,
Um, and the second thing that really kind of hit the mark for me was, you talk a little bit about how it's important to look at your job and your opportunities really broadly, because some of those skills, while they may not look like they fit into that perfect box, are those new perspectives and ideas that will be revolutionary in terms of innovating within our workplace. And they may have come from, maybe 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. Who knows when you captured that in your career? But keeping an open mind about what other perspectives and talents can add to our workplace is so important. And we're seeing that with a lot of in information security and compliance, because for many people in these roles, this is not a first career. Sometimes it's a second career, sometimes it's a third career. And so finding ways to take those skills and talents from multiple generations is really important.
absolutely. Um, the it's interesting too. If you look at this, my little case study report I put up over here, one of the things I found in interviewing companies and asking them how they deal with the multi-generational workforce, we found that mentorship programs and reverse mentoring programs are among the most popular things that companies are doing. And and the thing about it is it benefits both the experienced worker and the more junior worker as well. And I also want to just mention at the moment the importance of the informal mentor. I have a friend at AARP who reached out to me and invited me to a lunch circle. And the lunch circle was with other women who, most of whom were much more senior than myself. And by her bringing me in to those lunches, I got to meet people across our organization who were working, at a much higher level than myself, but it enabled me to form great connections, and I have been able to call upon my friends in that network when I've needed help. But most importantly, when I have faced difficulty at work, my friend has been there. And she's really more than a mentor. She's really a great friend, and it helps that she's in ethics and compliance.
Right.
So I just want to say there is great value to the informal network and mentoring other people because you decide you want to. So
Right.
Lisa Beth, what's that phrase? What's the phrasing we started borrowing heavily from Mary Shirley? It was council of
Wisdom council.
council. Yes,
Wisdom council, having your
that.
own wisdom council, because one of the things we started talking about is, yeah, mentors are great. You should absolutely have, a mentor or multiple mentors, but sometimes you go to different people for different things. Just like when you're
Mhm,
in a company, you wouldn't go to the head of HR to talk about what's going on with finance. um,
mhm,
you look at the different skills and experiences that your mentors have, because they've all lived different lives,
mhm.
right? um, so I've heard it called wisdom council. We've heard it called the advisory board of me. Right.
That's
Like
something you could put on your LinkedIn.
yeah, I'm part of the advisory board of me. But yeah, it's good to have those sounding boards, and it's really valuable to get those different perspectives, because people see life differently based on what their experiences are.
Well, I don't want to say you're stealing my thunder, but
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
so we did not have this pre-planned, but I like to talk about perspective as well. And we've already heard, different people have different perspectives. I want to talk about it in the sense of, how do you see yourself? Because a lot of times we sell ourselves short. Um, and so, so part of the discussion, how do we view ourselves? How do we see ourselves? What, you know, is our self view positive or is it negative? And I'll say that it can certainly vary depending on the circumstances. And so, anyway, the other part of perspective is how do you see the world? So I would like everyone to meet Peanut. Peanut is my dog daughter. She's 5 years old and she's very bad. Um, but what I love about this photo is if you look at it quickly, you think, wow, she seems big, but she's looking out on a vast beach and ocean. But really, she's very small. The other thing you could say is, is she thinking, gee, I'd like to go for a swim. Gee, maybe I can swim to Spain from here. She is a Jack Russell. And so, it's very likely she could be having that thought. Or, are you looking at her and you're saying, hey, this dog is on a leash. She's being held back. You know, what's up with that? Why is this dog not free? Or she could be saying, I think I'm going to go chase that bird right over there. So, in any case, I just think that sometimes we don't think about the broader perspective and we don't realize that we each have our own lens that we bring when we're looking at a particular situation. So, in terms of our lives and our work and careers, I think sometimes we get stuck and we think, I am a policy analyst, I am an economist, I am a compliance officer. And, and sometimes, we may be unemployed and we'll be saying, how am I ever going to get the same job I had? Or, I am this, how could I be that? And so the reason why I want to talk about perspective in this kind of environment is we often forget that the skills that we've learned, that our experiences qualify us to do many things, and that we are not our job title. We are so much more than that. And so when we're trying to determine where we want to go next or what we want to do next, we should be thinking about all of us, all of, I titled the presentation all of you, because I think we put parts of ourselves in boxes and say, well, I am only this or I am only that. And when you take it all together, you see you have so much more to offer. And it's you have more to offer the workplace, but the world in general. And I think sometimes we get stuck and we don't think about that.
that's
Good
beautiful.
point.
So after perspective, we have resilience. And so I want to talk a little bit about resilience because I have some personal experience with being challenged in my life, and so I just wanted to share a few stories with you. Um, so when I went off to college, I wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and I didn't have a guidance counselor who said, well, if you want to be a stand-up comedian, you should go move to Chicago, study improv, get in with Second City, and and write jokes. I thought, right, you go to college. So I go to college and I studied drama because there was no comedy major that I knew of. And so I said, let me, I'm going to be a drama major, much to the disappointment of my family who were totally not for it. And so for 2 years I took drama classes, and at the end of the 2 years somebody said, get off the stage and go into something technical. And it was, first of all, not something you should say to anyone ever. So I throw that out there as advice of what not to say to someone. But what it did is it propelled me. It made me pivot to something different. And so a friend of mine said, "Oh, take finance." And so, being an impressionable, crushed young woman, I said, okay. And I changed my major to finance and decided that I really liked economics as well. And after 1 year in the business department, I got a scholarship and ended up getting my master's degree free of charge, through this scholarship. And so I came out with a bachelor's in financial management and a master's in international economics. And so, I told myself that was okay. And, gosh, I'm good at this. And isn't this wonderful? I got a job at the Commerce Department as an economist, and, worked for a few years and said, gee, this is kind of a dud. You really can't do much in economics if you don't have a PhD. And so one of my former professors said, get your PhD. I said, oh, okay, I'll get my PhD. What a great idea. And so I continued working full time while working on the PhD. And so um, the next challenge came when I had spent 2 years working on a dissertation topic, only to have a professor say to me, and this guy was my advisor, oh, that's no topic, forget it. And this was, another devastating, crushing blow. I was going to quit. I was going to walk away. And one of my colleague professor, a professor came up to me and she said, you can't quit and this isn't right. And she went to the chairman of the department and he offered to chair my dissertation. And we started the whole process all over again. And I was able to get data. I was able to complete the dissertation and get my PhD. So start to finish, it was a 10-year effort, working full time while I did it. And, people said, oh, you're crazy. I had no social life. Even my dogs started to think I was a little bit nuts. But at the end of it, I succeeded. So I guess the point of these stories is, it's not a straight line, right? You don't, everything doesn't always go as planned, and you often hit major walls. It's not stumbling. It's not a stumble. It's a wall, and you got to climb it and come out of it. And just the one final story on the resilience issue. So after I got my PhD, my very supportive spouse and partner recommended I quit my job and go study comedy. And so I spent, 6 years doing just that, honing my skills and having the opportunity of a lifetime to pursue the one thing that I had to pursue. The gift of that is that I got really good at being on stage, at reacting in the moment, and I got to bring the humor with me. So when I went back to work, I was a different, more complete person. And just one last thing on that. When I went back to work, I started looking for a job in 2008. And for those of you who follow recessions, the Great Recession began when I was trying to find a job. And it took me 2 years to find a job. And by the end of the 2 years, I had begun to question my value in the workplace with a PhD in economics because there were no jobs. What few jobs there were, I applied for. I got 3 interviews between 2008 and 2010. And you really start to question everything about yourself and your personal value. So what I did in that moment, I went back to school and got a certificate in financial planning because I always felt that I wanted to help other people. And so many people in the world need help understanding finance and investment and savings and all of that. So I went back to school to do that, only to be offered a job for $40,000 a year and making the guys coffee, um, which I had to turn down for reasons of pride. Um, and so anyway, it took another year then to find a job. And so I guess, the point of all the stories is that, you really shouldn't give up, and don't ever forget your value as a person. I share this photo here. This is me on a mule in the Grand Canyon, and you got to be the mule. You got to put one foot in front of the other. You got to take it slow. But at the end of the day, you got to believe that you know where you're going, and that at the end of it, you're going to get there. And so, that is really the message that I would like to leave with you, is that you will get there. You can get there. It may not be as fast as you want, and it may hurt, because I'll tell you, 2 days of that equaled about 7 days of pain.
For you or the mule?
I'm sure both of us. I'm sure for both of us, but I don't think he had Advil. So anyway, I would like to now open it up for conversation, and to thank you for tuning in today, and to highly recommend when the world reopens that you all explore our national parks, because this trip to Grand Canyon was the trip of a lifetime. And anyway, so
I love it.
thank you.
I love how it comes full circle. Such beautiful storytelling about just life and career and things that people should know, and so inspirational. And one of the things that I am continually impressed with is I think that, to a T, every single person that we have had on as a speaker at MentorCore has told us that a career path is not linear. It never seems to be linear. I know mine isn't linear. Dan, I've known you forever, pretty much. Not since birth, but pretty close. But
definitely not linear.
No, it's never been linear. And I think that's part of the wonderful diversity of life, right? If everything is in a single path, then, there would never be any questions or any opportunities.
Well, how much of it though is people allowing themselves? Lori, you talked about giving yourself the latitude to make the decisions that were right for you or that made the most sense, even though they weren't always the easiest or the one that was presented to you. How much of that is that we're getting better at accepting that that's the fact? There was always this perception, at least when I was growing up, that linearness is the right path. You go in, you become a senior, and Nate described this last week. I become the senior version of what I do, and then I become the manager version of what I do, and I become the director version of what I do, and that is the prescribed path. But that doesn't always happen that way. I guess, are you seeing, Lori and Lisa Beth, that this is becoming? I guess we're letting ourselves admit that this is truth.
You want me to answer that?
Go ahead,
Please.
Lori.
Oh, so I think, there's been a shift in how people view career. And so if you go back, like I look at my father, he worked for the same company for 41 years. And when he was 65, the company was moving their location to another state, and they offered him a job. Like, he could have moved from New Jersey to South Carolina and kept working, and instead he chose to take a buyout, and he was very angry about that. And I look at that and I'm like, 41 years, like, holy crow. But they were not happy years. He complained incessantly about the job and the company, but he did nothing to change, you know, his his experience. He just stayed. I think in today's world we don't have the option of staying. A lot of times, you know, companies do not try to retain people for long periods of time. But I also think people do seek new opportunities much more than they used to, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. What I would say for me is I've worked for the U.S. government. I worked for a for-profit company. I worked for a nonprofit. I worked for my friend's consulting firm, on an hourly basis. I've done a variety of different things, and I've found that there are different organizations that I'd rather be at, uh, than not. And each type of organization has a different kind of focus in the way they do business. And so I think we're finding people have more social, put more value in the social mission of organizations, and the work that they're, who they want to work with and how they want to do the work. Um, so I think that's changed.
Yeah, and to me, I always kind of wonder, as we've seen, right? I think we've taken a 10-year leap forward in technology within 9
Mhm.
months.
Right.
And,
Uh-huh.
I start to wonder, as jobs become more obsolete more quickly, that level of obsolescence is becoming more rapid, and the need for continual new job training is becoming more and more of a factor. I just wonder what that looks like over the long haul, because my guess, and I am not a futurist, I am not an economist, though I did take economics in undergrad. My guess is that we will be in a very different position from a retraining people perspective in the next 5 to 10 years than we've ever been in the history of mankind. I think that the level of change is so rapid, and the skills, you know, you take compliance, it's not even 20 years old, really. Um,
Mhm.
People weren't compliance people. You didn't have chief compliance officers 20, 30 years ago, certainly not 50 years ago.
Mhm.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 10 years, because I think it's just going to be different than it was for our parents and our grandparents and their
Mhm.
parents, where maybe you were, the baker's son, and everybody knew you were going to be a baker, or you were the,
Mhm.
you know, um,
Yeah.
part of the dairy industry and you knew you were going to be in milk for the rest of your life. It's not that case anymore.
But I think it's also that the idea of the IBM job for life doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And so therefore we've leaned in, we've taken more people have taken more agency over their careers. It's a combo factor. It's which is this, which came first, the stimulus or the response. But I think it's a world that's had to respond. And people have and are now taking a much less linear approach.
So
Mhm.
we have a really good question in the chat. This person, there are a bunch of people who said they're loving this presentation. This was the presentation that they needed to hear right now. So Lori, thank you for that. I agree. It's a presentation that I think everybody needs to hear right now. But one of the questions that came in is, what suggestions do you have to get the attention of recruiters who still have a tendency to want to see a very linear path on a resume in the same industry? This person said that their resume is just as varied as yours, but even today, with all these
Mhm.
rapid changes in the economy and the workplace, some people have such a fixed mindset on, when they look at resumes, and they look at it and say that all of these skills learned are negative, like this person can't hold a job, rather than understanding the value that that brings to the
Mhm.
table.
Yeah, and I wish I had the answer, uh, other than to keep trying and to try to maybe make the difference in your cover letter, by telling the story of you succinctly but compelling in a compelling manner in your cover letter. again, the caveat being a computer may read your resume. A person may never see your resume because the computer's reading it. And they may never see the cover letter. And so, back in the day, I used to write very detailed cover letters. So one time I wanted to work in an organization, and they said, you must, and they had a humorous job posting. They said, you must have a sense of humor and like burritos. So
We're like done and done.
right. So I went and wrote a cover letter and went to this burrito place across the street or around the corner from where this organization was. I bought 50 different burritos and taped my resume. I folded up my resume and cover letter, taped it around each burrito, and dropped the burritos off. And so it cost me like, like 100 some bucks. But I decided, it was an organization I really wanted to get noticed. And so I did get a call back. And they really enjoyed lunch. I
Please come collect your burritos.
They
Great burritos.
Yeah, no, I mean they appreciated it. And it's a great story. I didn't get an interview. They said, well, we looked at your resume and we don't think you fit. But it got
Glad we found a
noticed.
kindred burrito spirit.
But
Yeah.
at least you got looked at. And that's
Right,
one of the
right.
things I hear
you
so
know.
much is I don't even know. It's ghosted. I never hear again.
Right.
It's a black hole. Did I even get considered? But beyond the applicant tracking system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, I've tried something like that. I mean, you could, I'm not opposed to trying to reach somebody by sending something, although you don't want people to think you're sending them something funky in a package that they're
As
going
it
to
gets
be
tested for anthrax or something.
right. Like you got to be careful. But I was very proud of trying the burrito thing.
The great burrito resume endeavor.
Yeah.
I love it. And the person who originally wrote that said, that's a great, comment. And they really appreciate the creativity. Another person said that their friend's son got an internship at a law firm in Atlanta just because they discussed the virtues of barbecue.
Mm-hmm. See?
Food is where we bond as people. We bond over food. Where do you make your strongest relationships? When you're visiting on a travel and you go out, it's when you're going out for dinner afterward, not necessarily in the meeting room. It's when you go out for dinner afterward and learn about people as people. And it all focuses around food.
Well, and so there's a couple of different threads here to talk about. I think one of the things that is really important is I love that you kept up with your creativity. And I will tell you, even when it was in the before times, in the way before times when people weren't using AI and computers to scan resumes. I remember being in college and really wanting to work for a big company, and I sent out 100 resumes, which was a lot because this is a lot of typing and a lot of processing at the time. And I did something that was actually really detrimental to me. I started posting all of the rejection letters. I was hanging them up in my dorm room with tape because we had those like um, brick walls that held up the tape pretty well. And eventually I was just like, no, this is not helpful because at the end of the day, you can only take one job. So all of those rejections are irrelevant, right? You just have to find that one right place for you. And eventually I did, just like with your journey. Eventually you did. It's just maybe not on the timeline that I had hoped for.
Right. Yeah, I think the one thing we have to accept, right, is we cannot create the timeline. We don't have control of the timeline, but what we do have control of is how we react and act within the timeline. And so it is about persistence.
Right. Right. And actually, our speaker from last week talked about that as well. And he said, look, there's three elements. You've got preparedness, luck, and timing, and you don't have control over the other two elements. You're kind of stuck with that. So just prepare, prepare, prepare.
Lori, one of the people here is asked a question about whether or not you had a mentor as you changed paths, and to what extent networking may have played a role in your successful transitions.
So when you mean when I went from comedy to getting my job at AARP? No,
Yeah.
I knew nobody at AARP, and I found the job on an online economist website, and I read the job description. And for the first time in years, I had every single thing that the job required. And I said, oh, okay, this is perfect. But then when I went to do the online job application, I had spent about 4 hours in there and kept getting error messages and like the electronic system. And this was back in 2010, because I've been at AARP now for 10 years. And um, I had to go back in the next day and start from scratch and start fresh, because I ended up in tears, like losing my mind. And so one of the things I like to talk about when I speak with companies about employment issues is make sure your application is doable. It shouldn't have taken me 2 days
Right.
to get, I'm not stupid. Uh, I don't think I am.
you, you've got a PhD in economics. I think
And
you kind of are doing all right.
right. But even now, if you go and apply for online jobs, every company has a different system. They want your resume separately. Then you have to still retype all the stuff in. And it is like so cumbersome. They don't make it easy. So, but anyway, again, I'll say, don't give up. The fact that I got hired knowing no one, it was a miracle, an absolute miracle. So it is still possible.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Great perspectives. And I know we are starting to run short on time. So I
Okay.
want to make sure that we have the opportunity to ask you our classic question, which is, what is the best advice that you have ever received from a mentor?
Okay. So when I was in graduate school, I had a friend whose boyfriend was a high level executive at the local airport authority. And so he was in his late 30s at the time, and he had this big executive position. And he told me, he said, Lori, you should be exploring right now. Use these early years of your career to try different things. And at the time I was working as an economist for the US Department of Commerce. And he said, so try that for a while, but then, try something else. He said, don't be afraid to move around. And then he said, by the time you get to be in your 40s or early 50s, by then you should know kind of what you'd like to do, where you want to be. And at the time, I thought that was great advice, because he gave me permission to pursue different things in a way that I was never encouraged to do so, because, like someone like my dad never changed jobs. So,
Right.
so it was the idea, don't be afraid to explore. The only thing I would say he got wrong about that is I am in my 50s and I'm still not done exploring. And so I don't think you should put an age limit on the exploration. I think at any age, you can learn new skills, you can pivot, you can go where you want to be, and age isn't the thing that should be determining where you go or whether you can do it. So
That's great advice.
I love that. And it's so interesting because I've seen so many people who end their working life and they discover a whole nother life that they have left unexplored, and
hmm
they finally are able to do things that they truly truly love. It's great
hmm
if you can incorporate them all at the same time,
hmm
wherever you are, but
right,
some people end up waiting until later in life to do that.
But at
right.
the same time, they also, one of two things can happen then. They say, I really wish I had started this earlier,
Correct.
had more time to do it.
hmm
Or they have gone so long without knowing how to explore that they retire, they leave their job, they're done working, and they
hmm
can't figure out how to pivot out.
hmm
And
right,
both are unfortunate cases, one quite a bit more than the other. But
Right.
hmm
yeah, the more you continuously you do that, the better
hmm
chance you have of being
hmm
able to do those things all your life.
Well, hopefully we can all learn from this. And I'm so happy that you were able to share all of these perspectives and join us today. I think we had a lot of questions and had the opportunity to impact a lot of different people with your talk. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'd just like to say, if anyone wants to reach out on LinkedIn, please do. I'd be happy to continue the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you for that open invite. And
Mhm.
I hope that everybody who's here remembers to join us next year, 2021. Here we come, where our first session will be with Richard Bistrong, and we'll be talking about his journey from a convicted felon to compliance expert and speaker. So we are looking forward to 2021 and to continuing this journey. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Lori, for all of your perspectives today.